If you've been enjoying Always Take Notes, please do consider contributing to our crowdfunding page on the platform Patreon.
If you support us on Patreon, you can get a wide variety of rewards, the best of which is a collection of successful magazine pictures from Simon, myself, and previous co-hosts and friends of the show. Simon is going to tell you a little bit about our latest contributor.
Our latest contributor is Sven Hughes. Sven's first novel, which is called Selling St. Christopher, is a contemporary spy thriller and is now being prepared for publication, and he's just signed up to the literary agents Bell Lomax Moreton. It's early days for him as a novelist, but we're really looking forward to seeing what he does going forward.
Thanks very much for your support, Sven.
Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. In this episode, Rachel and myself spoke with magazine editor Ed Needham.
We spoke to Ed about his time at FHM at the height of Lads Mags in the 1990s, his career at Maxim and Rolling Stone, and Strong Words, the literary magazine which he produces entirely by himself.
It's a great episode and we hope you enjoy it.
Welcome, Ed, to Always Take Notes. It's great to have you on the show. Could you start by telling us about Strong Words, this extraordinarily ambitious project that you do single-handedly every 6 weeks?
Okay, so Strong Words is a magazine about books, about new books, and one of the exceptional aspects of it, is exceptional in every way, but is that I produce it myself. So I write the whole thing, I produce the whole thing, and it comes out, as you mentioned, every 6 weeks, so that's 9 times a year. And so it's I've worked in magazines all my life, but this is the only time I've produced a magazine on my own.
And how is your sort of level of sanity and mental health after doing this project? And I say this genuinely because we just had Samantha Subramanian on, and maybe slightly mangling his name, but a very distinguished magazine writer who we were interviewing him a little while ago, and he told us about his like utterly grueling workload. Which what are his hours, Rachel? Like he gets up at 5:30 in the morning, works till mid-morning, short break, 6 p.m, sometimes 7 days a week. And he believed this to be totally unsustainable, and he was possibly, he needed to make step changes in his work-life balance. So, I mean, how are you coping?
Well, I completely identify with that schedule because it is a 7 days a week task, and there are 3 components to it, really. There should be 4. There's one component is missing, which I'll tell you about in a moment. The 3 components are walking, reading, and writing. And so I get up at 5:45 in the morning, and I tend to stay at my girlfriend's house, which is 6 miles away. So I get up at 5:45, walk from her house to mine, work at mine, and the day is principally just reading and writing. We calculated not so long ago that for each issue, so that's a 6-week issue, I read the equivalent of War and Peace every week, and I write the equivalent of The Great Gatsby every issue. And so there's not much time for anything else until it gets to about 6 o'clock in the evening when I walk back again. And so it's about 3 hours of walking every day as well. And during those 3 hours, I listen to audiobooks. So it's another way of consuming material. And I do it, because I really enjoy doing it. It's a lot of these things I would be doing anyway. I like walking, I like reading, I like writing. So it's not as if I'm suddenly doing something which is completely alien or foreign or unpleasant. But there is no sort of gap for anything else. And the 4th component that is kind of missing from these 3, which I've kind of learned a little bit to my cost, is marketing. So really, I think running a business, and this is a magazine, this is a business, I do it to make a living, it should be about 50% kind of editorial and 50% marketing. But like most people, I think, who've worked in the magazine industry, and probably in all businesses, they tend to be very compartmentalized, and people know their own bit and are great experts in their own bit, and completely ignorant of what the people in the office next door do, or the people on the floor above or below do, and tend to be a bit disdainful of it. So certainly working in magazines, editorial is everything. It's the words and pictures and headlines and covers which sell the product. And the people in the marketing department, I don't really know what they do, but it can't be that important. And since producing my own magazine, it's been getting on for 3 years now, my respect for people in the marketing department has gone through a 180-degree transformation.
You design it yourself as well. Did you have to sort of teach yourself the basics of graphic design?
Well, this is the one sort of skill, the one editorial skill that I don't have. So I pay a designer for 2 weeks to design it in every issue, but it was very much conceptualized with that it would be made of templates that I could sort of fill in each issue. So I can't design a page, but I can certainly put copy into a template and put a picture in and write a headline on. So my idea was that actually if I just build a sort of template issue, then I could produce a sort of an identikit issue by changing the copy and pictures each issue. But I think that it didn't quite work. It needs, if I wanted to introduce new things, I wanted to look a bit different, then it needs a designer, and that's the one skill that I have to buy in from outside.
Is the plan that it's going to remain a one-man band, or are you going to bring in? Are you recruiting?
Well, it's not a means to an end. No, it's not an end in itself. My goal is not to just constantly write the whole thing. It would be lovely to bring some other people in, but it's the reason I did it in the first place is because I only know how to do magazines. I don't really know how to do anything else. So I thought, well, let's see if the technology of magazine production has advanced so much that I thought, how few people would it be possible to produce my own magazine with? When I started doing magazines in the sort of 90s, early 90s, I was once taken to see some of the external labour that went into producing magazines in what used to be called the colour house or the repro house. These people actually make the pages ready to go to the printers. It's a very technical stage that had to be done again by people who are trained in the use of these machines that I just couldn't. You could stand and look at them all day and you wouldn't be able to work out what they did, let alone how to work them. And an entire building full of this machinery was required. When I was working in the United States at FHM, the pages had to be biked to the airport and flown to another part of the country 1,000 miles away to be put together. So the magazine sort of technology has changed so much in the last 2 or 3 decades that I thought, well, is it actually possible to do a magazine on oneself or by oneself, or is it actually possible? How many people would it take? And I thought, well, I'm going to try and do it on my own and see if it works. And it turns out that I could do it. But to answer your question, the goal is not to keep on doing it on my own forever, but it is, in order to keep the costs right down for the time being, I'm doing it myself. And it's also partly because I don't want to, people do say, maybe you could get, people will do it. I'm sure people will do it for nothing, for a byline, people who are looking to get students who are looking to get a start, or, people who just like writing for pleasure. I'm sure people will do it for nothing, but I kind of don't want people to do it for nothing because I feel it's just wrong. I feel too guilty about it. And I think people should be paid for what they're doing. But also, I kind of like, I like my way of doing it, and I fear that if I opened it up for people who are doing me a favour, then I'd probably end up falling out with them because I want it done a particular way, and whereas people would like to see their own work in all its glory, untainted by somebody else's hand.
When you set up Strong Words 3 years ago in 2017. What gap in the market did you want to fill?
Well, I suppose my original goal was, how can I make a living? And I thought it was partly a mixture of what can I do on my own and where do I think there is something missing. I soon kind of got to books because I thought, well, book people will understand, if anyone is going to appreciate an ink on paper product, it's going to be people who read books. The magic of holding something in your hand, the power of the the written word on a piece of paper, book readers will get that. So there are a couple of other ideas that I thought of, but I came to books, and I came to books also because I really like reading about books, but the amount of sort of square footage devoted for books in the press has really shrunk, because there's, the press has been affected by all sorts of reasons, but as advertising has vanished, the pages just aren't there for people to review books. So the book industry doesn't get anything like the amount of, review square footage that it needs. And also the way in which books are reviewed in too many places, it kind of goes over my head a bit. I buy a lot of books. I'm a reasonably intelligent person, but I think too often I found critics writing about books either with a level of snobbery that put me off, or a level of sort of technical, sort of academic language, which is fine if you're writing for other academics, but these are technical expressions that that experts used, and to see that kind of creeping into sort of newspaper reviews of books, again, it put me off. So I felt that there wasn't any one place writing about books for people who just buy books for pleasure, because they're going on holiday or because they just like reading. So that's the goal. And I was reading a book the other day about I looked at Anthony Bourdain's Kitchen Confidential, and his big thing is about being a bistro chef. He's not a sort of Michelin-starred guy. He is a guy who tries to produce food of a really high level, but for those people who aren't, they don't want all the intimidating cutlery of the Michelin-starred restaurant. They don't want to be terrified by the wine list, all these kind of things. So I want it to be, it's like a bistro level magazine where you're going to get great stuff. It's really reliable. It's of really high quality, but it's kind of for the average person. You don't need any sort of special education in wine lists and cutlery to come and enjoy.
So we wanted to come back to strong words later in the interview, but can we roll back now to your entry into journalism and how you got your start? So you were a teacher and you lived abroad, right, in Spain, and also you grew up in Cambridge. I grew up in Cambridge. I wanted to see.
Did you?
Yeah. Did you grow up in Cambridge itself? Or?
I grew up just outside of Cambridge in a small village just to the south of Cambridge called Needham, which is a tiny speck. About 5 miles to the south of Cambridge.
Okay, I grew up in Cambridge and I don't know it, so it must be quite quite remote. But Gia, can you tell us your origin story, as it were?
Well, I did live in Spain. I went to Spain after I was at university for the same reason that many people go abroad after university, because I just didn't know what to do, and I had a friend who lived in Spain, so I thought that sounds like fun, and. So I thought, well, maybe I'll go for a year and see what happens. But I ended up staying for 7 years, and I did teach for a bit, and I absolutely detested teaching. I'd realised very early on, this is not for me. So I became a translator, and which was very much for me, and I really enjoyed being a translator. But one of the things that happened in Spain that really made a difference to me was the really sort of making the first contact with glossy magazines. Because this was sort of late 80s, early 90s. You have to remember it took a couple of days for the papers to arrive in Spain. So this is obviously pre-internet. So any kind of connection with the outside world was very slow and probably not all that different to the way it had been in the 19th century. It took a while. You had to wait for things to arrive by written down on a piece of paper on some form of transport to know what was going on in the outside world. In many instances, obviously, you listed the World Service or whatever. But there were two magazines that really blew me away. And one was the launch of Q, the music magazine, and it's just its tone of sort of reverent irreverence. They really took their subject seriously, but knew exactly how to pitch they knew exactly how to express the entertainment that they got from their love of music, and some of that was serious, and some of it was very, about the great sort of folly of artists and musicians. And the other magazine that really made an impact on me was Vanity Fair, and it was the Vanity Fair that Tina Brown was editing, and I think that was sort of, it's like American long form journalism, when it's done really well, is absolutely it crushes all competition anywhere in the world, I think. And it doesn't happen very often. It's like American long form journalism could too often stray into sort of slight. I think too many American journalists want to be academics, and it gets a bit serious and solemn and boring and niche and dreary. But when it's at its best, like Vanity Fair then consistently was, it's just unbelievably good. And that, having her sort of finger on the pulse of all things powerful and influential, really understanding how important people, worked, and their flaws and their failings and their vanities and all these kind of things, just made me think that this is. I used to go and wait outside the newsagent to see if the next issue had arrived. I couldn't get enough of it for a while. So those two things, those two magazines, made me think. This is definitely a world I wanted to get into, and I'd always fancied being a journalist, but I'd never really done anything about it. So when it got to it was coming up to my 30th birthday, which feels like the year when the shutters come down, if you haven't done what you sort of dreamt of doing when you were a bit younger. If you haven't done it by 30, that's it. Your time's up. So just before I was 30, I thought, I've got to give this a last go. And it wasn't because I didn't want to be a journalist because I wanted to change the world. I didn't feel I had anything I particularly wanted to say that was of great import. I just really liked the look of that profession. I thought that looks like great fun. Those seem like my kind of people. And let me in. So I moved back to England and shoved my way in.
Tell us more about the shoving.
Sorry, say again?
Tell us more about how you shoved your way in.
Oh, I see. Yes. Well, it's just, I think you need two things, kind of, you need a bit of luck and you need some connections. And so it was a mixture of those three. I started freelancing for people, this wherever I could. And I got involved with FHM magazine in the sort of mid-90s. It must have been about 94, 95. When, just as the world of men's magazines was beginning to wake up to the fact that actually men wanted a slightly more interesting magazine than, these slightly laboured men's titles where they assumed everyone wanted to be like James Bond and talk about single malt scotch and fountain pens and this kind of stuff. So I was very lucky I had a friend who worked at FHM at the time. FHM was then a very small sort of men's fashion magazine. And it just happened to have been bought by EMAP, a big magazine company, who were prepared to invest in it enormously. And a chap called Mike Sutar had taken over as the editor. And those two things together, transformed it into this sort of what very quickly became a magazine that was selling almost 1 month. It sold over 1 million copies. It became one of the biggest magazines in the country. So it was a thing of great good luck, really, to have got involved with that magazine, with that editor, and at that particular time.
So a lot of our listeners are kind of aspiring journalists or young journalists who just won't have been around or won't have been of a sort of conscious age in the 1990s. Could you, when we have people talking about past media periods on the show, what we always ask them to do is to explain it in the most kind of brutally honest way possible, like take off no rose-tinted spectacles, like what was good, what was bad, explain to a 19-year-old of today like what the kind of magazine media landscape of the mid-1990s was like, as though you were explaining to an alien, as it were.
Well, to me, and again, because I came to it quite, relatively late, the great thrill of it was being in that building. The EMAP then had two buildings: a building where the sort of men's magazines were housed, and a building where the women's magazines were housed. And the men's magazine building was on a tiny street called Winsley Street, off Oxford Street. And so on our floor, so the idea that this was a building that where all these magazines lived, to me was kind of mind blowing. They're all in the same place, and all these people that you've heard of and stuff you've read, they're all there. So we were next door to Smash Hits, and then next door to that was Mojo, and across the corridor was Kerrang, and then downstairs was Empire, and Q, and some other sort of younger people's magazines. So it was almost like when you hear people talking about things like Tin Pan Alley in the golden age of songwriting, where you could go into a building and there would be all these famous songwriters. To me, it was that level of mind-blowing. So a journalist that I'd admired for years, going up and down the stairs was just it's kind of it's like I couldn't compute. It was exactly where I wanted to be. And every magazine was in its own space, behind its own door. There's none of this, no hubs, no open plan. And every magazine had its own personalities. It would have its own pictures on the wall, its own way of doing things, its own kind of hierarchy. And that sort of spirit that, people being corralled into often very tiny spaces. These weren't, great, football pitch sized offices. They were just minuscule, and they just crammed more and more people in there as the magazine became more and more successful. And so you get these people working really long hours on top of each other, and it develops an extraordinary spirit. And I think that's one of the things that used to absolutely shine through magazines. What they call the voice, this understanding of what the values of the magazine were, the tone, the important things, the reference points. They just became second nature because people just lived it all the time. And it's something which has kind of gone from magazines now, where, hot desking, whatever, even working from home is the absolute death knell, I think, for magazines, because if you're not in constant prattling communication with people next to you, all the tiny sort of microscopic things that become key ingredients of magazines just aren't there anymore. And I know the magazine industry has bigger, concerns than that, having people in the same room. But that to me was the essence of magazine-ness, is people being really close together, spending a lot of time in really small rooms, and as intense a form of labour as you're ever going to experience, I think.
You talked about the importance of tone. What would you say that the tone of FHM was when you arrived, and how did it change over the years that you were there?
Well, I think the tone of it was very much a sense of kind of bewilderment at the way men were, and we obviously, most of us there were men, were expected to behave. So part of it was a sort of satire on what publishing for men had been like previously, whereas this thing of this assumption that everybody wanted to be like, as I mentioned, wanted to be like James Bond. So that would translate into just absurd stories, like how to, which men's magazines would write about with great seriousness, and these ideas would just come around again and again. Things like, which kung fu move to use if you're ever mugged in the street, or which supercar should you be thinking of buying? They're just things that it's just nonsense, kind of rubbish. So it's very much men's magazines used to have this kind of assumption that all men, and this came from real life, it wasn't just a magazine thing, but this assumption that all men knew exactly how to behave in every circumstance. So especially when it came to anything to do with women, all men knew how to sort of behave in the appropriate manly fashion. So I think one of the big things that FHM did was to recognise, actually, most men haven't got the first clue. And most men sort of come from, carrying this around sort of slightly as a sort of secret of some sort, is it only me? And so I think it came as a great relief to men to realise, actually, it's much, I'm in the minority with my sort of ignorance and cluelessness, and it's okay to say, actually, I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to be doing here, or now that I'm in a relationship, I don't really know how to make it work. Or, so these sort of confusion and bewilderment of being a man were the norm, and therefore something to be kind of, laughed at and enjoyed in that way, rather than as something to sort of cringe at in embarrassment.
There's been a lot of discussion in recent years about the gender politics of publishing, about the way that women are depicted in men's magazines and so forth. What would you, look at both at the time and looking back in terms of how the magazine depicted women and stuff like that? How did it feel at the time, and how do you feel about it now?
Well, FHM was very friendly, had a very friendly attitude towards women, I think, it's undeniable that one of the reasons it was successful was because it had pictures of celebrities in a state of some undress, but nothing compared to what, say, you find in the Mail Online today. So I think in that sense, it's actually FHM, even though it felt quite radical at the time, was actually, compared to today, was quite conservative. So. Again, it wasn't a magazine which depended on sort of stereotypical and misogynistic ideas towards women, and it was enormously successful. And so I think that's the way to kind of to measure it. What worked then, and that was very much the success of FHM, as selling 1 million copies a month, sort of indicates just how popular it was. If it were a magazine which made people feel uncomfortable or awkward, or was attracting endless criticism, there's no way it would have been enjoyed such a sort of golden few years.
You've mentioned in previous interviews the tube test that you applied to FHM covers. Would a man be happy being seen reading it on the tube? Do you think someone today would read FHM on the tube?
No, I mean, I think those. No, I mean, just because it doesn't exist anymore. So it's not because they would be uncomfortable with
the FHM of the 90s. I mean,
no, I don't see why not. I mean, obviously people look at their phones, and so I think people are probably looking at FHM type material, for want of a better expression. The brand values of FHM were very much in anticipation of the internet. So the brand values were funny, sexy, useful. Those are the three things that the magazine tried to do constantly and consistently. And I think you see, those are three absolutely sort of foundation values of the internet generally. And so they're still the kind of things that men are looking for. It's just now they're looking for it on their phone rather than as a printed product.
During that high period where I think, as you mentioned when we corresponded by email, that everything you're touching is turned to gold, you're shifting 1 million copies. How was that reflected in the kind of resources that were available to you, and in terms of what you're staffing, like what you were able to do when there was that much, when you were shifting that many copies?
Well, it's always felt like it was done on a very tight budget, and it never went up. So I mentioned, being in these tiny rooms. Certainly when I was deputy editor, I became so in the sort of late mid sort of 1996, perhaps something like that. As a deputy editor, my salary felt I was quite shocked when they said, congratulations, you got the job. This is what we're going to be paying you. I was like, oh, really? For such a successful magazine, I thought, surely you could do a bit better than that. I remember having a big fight with the publisher as well when we went away, and which I'm still immensely ashamed of to this day. But we all had a bit too much to drink and said what we thought about the way we were being recompensed. Given that the magazine was doing so well, so it certainly wasn't a magazine that became successful because of throwing money at it. But later on, when FHM was launched internationally, and it did have a lot of very successful licensed editions. I think that at its peak, I think it had maybe getting over 30 different editions around the world. it became clear that the value of the pictures that FHM was taking were considerable, because they could manage to build this sort of licensing business on it. And then the amount of money that was being paid to photographers, certainly, or in kind of deals, really exploded, because we worked out that if we get sort of photographer A to take a picture of celebrity B and pay very exclusive, pay the fee to make it exclusive, then it's the money earned back in all these international editions buying it up and making their profit from it, it suddenly made it all worthwhile. So it did, for a little while, FHM had the market to itself. It worked out that big female celebrities on the cover were absolute gold dust. And we had a chap then, when I was the editor, he was the deputy editor, chap Anthony, who was just brilliant at negotiating with the right people in Hollywood to make this happen, which is a really difficult skill. And if anybody has any familiarity with that, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Really difficult people, impossible demands, having to work with them in the middle of the night, constantly changing their minds, just impossible. Anyway, he worked out how to get in their groove, and he made it happen. And that was one of the big reasons why FHM was so successful, because it had, for just a few years, it was getting huge stars on the cover that nobody else had. Well, GQ was still plodding along with, Martin Amis or whatever. And other people didn't know how to get these women. So after a while, obviously, everybody kind of worked it out. And the more sort of sophisticated magazines were able to sort of push in front and started putting big female stars on the cover of their magazines, which kind of cut off the supply a little bit. And then it all, I think that's when it started to, the market kind of samed again, as it were. Everyone became a little bit the same.
Maybe Martin Amis should have sort of stripped down a bit more, might have shifted some more copies.
Yes, a little bit more brass strap.
Exactly. When you made the step up from deputy editor to editor-in-chief, what changes did you implement?
None, really. It's very much more of the same. This was a magazine which was on the up and up. I'd been, as deputy, I think there's two editors tend to have two sort of styles of editing, and everybody has to kind of do a bit of both. But I think some editors are sort of in the engine room type editors, and other editors are more sort of captain's table editors. So some prefer to be, hands-on with the staff and producing the magazine. Others are much more interested in the more external things of either sort of publicity, or going to events, or shaking hands with advertisers, this kind of thing. And my thing is very much I'm much more engine room. And so I really, the thrill that I got from editing the magazine was in actually making the pages, making the headlines, working with the staff, making sure the copy was good, making sure the captions were good. And obviously everybody has to do a bit of that. So everybody has to do a bit of the other, rather. So I still had to, go and say thank you to advertisers every now and again, that sort of thing. But really the thrill for me was in actually producing the thing. And that, didn't change very much, because I'd been doing a lot of that before. And when Mike was the editor, he was much more captain's table, so he was a guy who wouldn't be around, if we were closing pages at 11 o'clock at night, he'd be gone. And it was quite a funny thing, where after he'd been gone after he'd left, we bumped into his wife once, because he was one day a week, he always used to leave early. So, because I've got to go to my wife's. My wife does yoga, so I've got to go and look after the kids. So we bumped into his wife once, short after he left, and said, "Oh, Bev, how you doing? How's the yoga going?" And she said, "What yoga?" It was just he'd just been making up excuses to get out of the office early. So, but he was things didn't change, because I'd kind of been doing that. I'd been doing that anyway, and why meddle with something that was so clearly a winning formula? It was. I think if there were changes, it was more in along the lines of how on earth are we going to get all these pages out? Because the magazine just got fatter and fatter and fatter. And so it was more solving the issues of how to keep the quality high and still get all these pages out at the end of the month.
I wanted to ask in a moment about your move to the US, but a question I had was, when you went out on an assignment for FHM and said you were here from FHM in various contexts, what kind of reaction did you get from the people you were writing about? Or, how were your journalists perceived when they went out on their jobs, as it were? Was it easy to get access, or was there a sort of wryness about it? How did that one work?
No, I mean, generally kind of people were kind of, wow, great, what you guys must be living the most amazing life, because this magazine at the time, it was the biggest thing. It sold the most copies. And it had this sort of sense of this is, these people are just leading an incredible life. It looks like great fun, and you also seem to be massively enjoying yourself. So what's it like? I think, and so there was never any. No, I think if you're implying, was there any awkwardness or any? Did people feel a bit?
Not awkwardness, just interested as what it was like getting access and getting people to talk. And yeah, I think I read an interview with a GQ editor once who said that they would send people to interview politicians and they'd always think, oh, it'll be all about the suit, and then actually they'd be wanting to get pretty in depth with the reporting and things. But yeah, just what it was like in terms of getting people to speak to you.
And it was fine. It was never a challenge at all. I mean, you have to bear in mind that most people speak to magazines because they're trying to sell something, and they don't just do it because they feel like it or because they like the magazine. There's a publicist behind them who says you're going to speak to magazine A, B, and C, and you speak to magazine A because it sells the most, and you speak to magazine B because it's the most influential, and you speak to magazine C because we know someone there and we like them. So if you're the one that sells the most and delivers the biggest audience, then it's pretty easy to get on that schedule.
Before I'll let Simon move on to the Rolling Stone years, but this is a sort of last question about this. I wondered what you thought the lasting cultural impact was of sort of men's magazines, because I know they sort of went downhill in 2001 and you moved to Rolling Stone in 2002. But when I was doing my research, I was amused to see that there was a reference to the loaded generation in the Houses of Parliament in a debate. I mean, what do you think the lasting impact has been of men's magazines?
Oh, I've never really thought of that, but because they came and went, and they had their moment, and then, they sort of served their purpose, and it disappeared. So I think I'm not sure people really. I honestly don't know. I don't know. I'm struggling to answer that one. I have to get back to you on that one, as we say in journalism.
Can we move on to your time in the US, but particularly in the context, and again, you mentioned this when we were emailing, about the difference in American versus British magazine culture. So in terms of the size of staffs, the level of budgets and resources, and then, the kind of access to, how was that both for you personally and for the industry as a whole?
So I moved to the United States in 1999, and I launched the American edition of FHM there. I did that for 2.5, 3 years. And 2002, I went to Rolling Stone. And when I went to Rolling Stone, then that was a sort of revelation as to how a proper American magazine is produced. So you're asking about, resources and access and things like that. Suddenly, and so when I had to launch FHM, his magazine that people hadn't necessarily heard of, or they didn't know what it was going to be like, or they're a bit sort of nervous about it. American sort of publishing tends to be a lot more, or certainly then tended to be a lot more conservative. They're worried it was going to be a bit too racy. They're worried they said, we'll wait and see if how you do, and then we'll work out if we're going to get involved with you. So it became a little bit difficult to wrangle people for the covers then. Whereas in contrast, at Rolling Stone, the sort of reputation of that magazine, the legend of that magazine, the quality of the photographers that they worked with was such that you could kind of call anybody, any A-list celebrity, and they would pretty much drop what they were doing in order to take up an offer to appear on the cover. So that was like night and day in that sense.
And when you're when you took up your role there, was it the same sort of engine room, writing headlines, really involved in getting the stuff on the page?
Yes, I mean, obviously it's American magazines traditionally, and again, this is all in the past. I don't really know how things are now from my perspective of a magazine with a staff of one, and a staff of one in which I'm effectively the intern. But then there was, they would have kind of twice as many staff, at least twice as many staff. It was Rolling Stone was fortnightly then, so it would naturally have more people, but just the sort of levels of seriousness. So the copy editing team, fact checking team, lots of the editors had assistants. There were just numbers of people doing tasks that magazines like FHM in the UK never even dreamt of having. The editor would, the person who'd signed the story would edit it. There was no copy editing. There's no fact checking. It would, or rather, there wasn't a sort of separate level of those things. It was all kind of done by the same person. So suddenly, the idea that a piece of copy had to make its way through almost like this, it's like a piece of film through a projector, sort of pass all these different gates, and was just something that was completely new to me.
What was your relationship with Jan Wenner like? Because obviously he was the sort of founder, right? And how did we really know some friction with that? And how did you negotiate that interaction?
Well, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to work at Rolling Stone. Jan was the founder of the magazine in the 60s and had become, he had the vision to, produce a really forward-thinking magazine at a time when, music and politics and culture were all somehow interwoven. The idea that you would launch a magazine nowadays about music and politics is just, the people would look at you like there's something wrong with you. You just escaped from a special hospital. It's like launching a magazine about politics and take away food. The things that don't necessarily seem to have anything to do with each other. But then,
I'd read that.
That would be well up Rachel's street, actually.
The counterculture was such that all these things were kind of really enmeshed, and the United States was just changing so dramatically that he had the vision to produce a magazine out of it, and a magazine which was successful and that connected with people. So, and through that became a very handsomely rewarded mogul. He rose from being a magazine editor to being a player in bigger fields. In very well connected to the entertainment world, very well connected to the political world. And that's something. So I was very eager to see what it's like to go from working at a company like EMAP, where they're immensely supportive of the whole editorial side of things, to a company like Wenner Media and Rolling Stone, where, there is somebody at the top of the company who has kind of ultimate power over everything, but it's at the same time, it's a very powerful magazine to be part of. And so we got on very well. I think we had a good relationship. He was quite interested in bringing somebody in from outside at the time. And but it's also quite frightening, because he's to work for somebody who ultimately can do what they want. Or even worse, they can make you do what they want. And there's not much you can do about it. If somebody who with that level of power and control decides, I don't like what you've done at all, and even though magazine's going tomorrow, you've got to do it again, you don't have any comeback. So there's it's a very different scenario. I mean, he has a sort of certain fame for being quite a difficult individual. When I was at FHM, there's a woman who worked there, who'd worked for Rolling Stone for many years. When she found out I was going, she said, "You are out of your mind. You are going to have the toughest time there." She was genuinely shocked that I was thinking of going there. But that was one of the things that I wanted to see. I wanted to experience that and find out just what it is like to work in a very different journalistic environment.
I read a piece that you wrote, I think in The Guardian in 2007, which sort of reflected on that period with a bit of sort of nostalgia, talking about velvet ropes and five-star hotels. Was it as glamorous as that, or was that a bit of sort of, creative storytelling, if you will?
Well, not so much at Rolling Stone, because that was not a magazine that kind of encouraged people to sort of go out and live the life. It wasn't a place of press trips and everybody sort of going down the pub at the end of the working week. It's a very, very serious magazine, and people took it immensely seriously. But the other two magazines that I edited there, FHM, and then Maxim, which at the time was the biggest men's magazine in the world, they were all about extracting maximum pleasure from the experience of being a journalist or working on a magazine at that time, that period in history. So there was certainly plenty of, as you say, velvet ropes and free cocktails and that kind of thing. So one of the things I was talking about earlier when you were asking about resources and the sort of growth of it, when we arrived in America with FHM, there's a big, FHM used to do a big supplement called The 100 Sexiest Women, which was a massively successful money-spinning supplement, both in terms of sales and in terms of press that it generated. It was a genius idea. And when this became when FHM became an international publication with all these licenses, the American edition had a big party in Los Angeles for the first American edition of this, and it was gigantic. And it was one of these things had sort of panthers in cages and had some kind of international theme. I can't quite remember what it was, but the winner of the woman at the top of the list that year was Jennifer Lopez. And to get Jennifer Lopez to come along, she had to be given some kind of inducement. And you can't just kind of bung them a load of money. That would be completely inappropriate. So she was given a gift, and the gift was a Jaguar car, and I think it cost about $80,000. But the sort of logic of this was that she gets this gift. The magazines kind of collectively fund it. Each magazine will then generate so much profit from having these pictures and this press that the cost of the car, it just vanishes when compared to the amount of money that could be made from this piece of investment. So anyway, she came along to this party with a gigantic entourage and picked up the car. And it was my job to give her the car keys. So there's a little presentation where she came up and sort of asked her a few questions and said a few nice things to her. And said, congratulations, Jennifer Lopez, you really are the sexiest woman in the world, and here are the keys. And she said, thank you very much. And off she went. And
cheers for the car. Bye.
My work here is done.
Yeah, quite. Well, you would have thought so, but no, she vanished. Off she went with her entourage, and it really was a mess. I can't remember. For some reason, I remember it was about 60 people, but it can't have been that gigantic. Anyway, she had lots of friends and lots of people around her. And then about a couple of hours later, somebody came up to me and said, yeah, we need to move the car now. So have you got the keys? So of course I haven't got the keys. I gave them to Jennifer Lopez. They said, oh, well, she's gone off with them. So what do you want us to do with the car? She just left the car behind and left it for somebody else to deal with. That was how, unremarkable it was in the life of Lopez. Presumably it happens every other day.
Could we talk about your sort of post-Glossy magazine life? So, you leave Rolling Stone and you set up your Grand Parade, is it? Your own sort of agency. What was were you kind of done with magazines then, or what was your...
Well, I think, so I moved back from the United States in 2006, and it became clear that the bloom was off the rose, certainly with regards to men's magazines. They were kind of selling significantly less than they had done in their heyday. And magazines generally, the internet had by then really started to make an impression on the magazine market. The way the magazine industry was completely blindsided by the internet. I remember when it first sort of appeared, we thought, oh, that's not very good, is it? That's. I remember watching a picture download, and it took about 2 minutes to download a single picture. I thought, well, that's, you don't have to worry about that. And then it sort of improved a little bit, and we thought, well, maybe we should have a website, but we're not going to give anything away from the magazine. Why would we do that? We'll just give it the rubbish, the stuff that's not good enough to go in the magazine. So that went on the website. And so obviously every step of the way, magazines were just too slow to catch on to the revolutionary potential of the internet. But also, magazines are already portable. They're already accessible. They're already, they can't. It's not a product that could be much improved by being made digital. The magic is in the paper, and so it was on a bit of a hard as nothing anyway. So by 2006, I could kind of see I need to get out of this somehow. I need to find a bit more of a lifeboat. So with a colleague, I launched this company called Grand Parade, which was an online colleague from America, a friend from America. We did it together. An English guy who'd been in America at the same time, and the idea was to produce, and it was an online publishing platform, an online publishing company devoted to sports and betting. This was our theory. So there'd been suddenly sports people had started to appear much more on the front pages as well as the back pages, and people were becoming betting related information was becoming more newsy rather than sportsy. And there's only really the Racing Post and at the time the Sporting Life, and then obviously a bit of racing in the newspapers that dealt with betting. Whereas I thought, here's a potential of something that could be become much more mainstream, and people talk about it, and even people talk about betting or probability of one thing happening over another in sports all the time, even if they don't even have a bet on it. And we just happened to do it at the same time as there was a big change in betting, in regulation governing advertising in betting, and it took off slowly at first, and then it did okay. But what companies were really interested in was the technological side of what we were doing. So it became, we bought a company in Poland that did all the sort of development for websites and the sort of technical aspect, putting feeds, putting live odds into copy, this kind of thing, producing banner ads which would know which team you supported, and all these kind of things. And that side of it grew massively for one reason in particular, which is that my colleague, a bloke called Andy Clarkson, was a massively entrepreneurial individual, and really, worked every angle, and it became very successful. But it was the technology that made it successful. And just as I find no challenge at all spending 7 days a week reading books and writing about books and thinking about books, I find it really difficult to spend 7 minutes thinking about technology. It just doesn't spark my imagination. So the fact the company went off in a much more technological direction, and that's where the growth was. And after, was it 8 years I was there for, I think, I left and let them go on their technological way. But it did very well, and it was a successful company.
And to return to strong words, as we're nearing the end of our time, you mentioned sort of it has to be financially sustainable. How many if you're willing to tell us how many copies you sell sort of each edition?
Well, that's still a private figure. It's still an exclusive club, but I'm sort of happy for people to join. It's still funded by the Bank of Needham, which is slightly frustrating. It's like I said, marketing is the aspect which has been a little bit neglected on this magazine. But I firmly believe that people, people, the relationship between magazines and people is just as strong as it ever was. It's just that there aren't so many magazines about. And I'm also if the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of of 5 stages of grief, when something has died. And if the magazine industry has died, I'm still very much in the first stage of that denial, possibly in the first stage of the first stage, which is that absolute refusal to accept that magazines don't have a really important part to play in life and a great deal of potential to, make people really happy. And so my goal really is to obviously sell magazines, but to sell magazines by being useful and by being entertaining. And they are qualities that I feel will, survive regardless of the technological environment.
And as a final question from me, what has the reaction been from authors and from the literary industry as well? I saw you've got a great selection of endorsements in the magazine itself, but yeah, what's the feedback from that part of the world been like?
Well, good, very good, because as I sort of mentioned earlier on, the book industry has a hard time finding opportunities to expose a great deal of its product. There are I think there's something like, because I can't remember the number now, but it's hundreds of thousands of books come out every single year. So that's, and only a tiny handful of them get any sort of attention. And it's really unfortunate that a lot of those books that get the attention are books which have a celebrity attached to them, who often didn't even write the book in the first place, ghostwritten, or somebody else has kind of done it for them. So and obviously newspapers and TV love that, because then they can get somebody famous on. Whereas people who are grafting away and it's pouring years of their lives and just agonies of the soul into these often really superb, magnificent books, they don't get any attention at all. So the publishing industry, on the whole, is delighted to see a magazine which is devoted to books and which really cares about books and which is interested in just communicating that love of books to other people. The idea with Strong Words reviews is that they look at you, buy the magazine, and they say, well, that's the book for me. I'm not trying to say, well, this book is not as good as their last one, or I feel that this is, really important in the culture at the moment. I just want people to read the review, think, I'm going to get that one. And that's how it works.
And as a final question, you've said that you've learned some insights about secrets, I think you put it, of how authors write. Are you willing to share any of them with listeners?
Well, they're not so much, so secrets. I think I'm going to start doing a podcast with Strong Words about writing, about the technique of writing, but there are 2 aspects which you cannot avoid. So I write about, in Strong Words every issue, I write about, there's a feature called How to Write, in which I look at it tends to be a novel, famous novel, and look at the sort of historical background to that novel. So it's not so much, this such and such a person started at that time of day, or they used a particular fountain pen. It's what happened in their life, the steps that they went through that built up to that novel being written. And there are 2 things from studying all these, reading all these histories and biographies of people and how they wrote their books. The 2 things which are inescapable, which you have to do. One is you have to have read a lot. There's just no way around that. I have yet to find a single author who has written something, really groundbreaking or which has stood the test of time, who hasn't read a ton, and often from a very early age. So that's one. The other thing you have to do, which is not negotiable, is persevere. You have to stick with it. So even though these people who seem to have enjoyed overnight success, you don't need to look into it very hard to find that, it took them years to get to that point of overnight success. So one of the great examples is someone like Frederick Forsyth and The Day of the Jackal, which everyone always talks about as having been written almost overnight. I think it took him 30 days to write it. So it was a miraculous piece of writing. Sit down and churn it out that quickly, and so such a beautiful book. But to get to that point, it took him 8 or 10 or 12 years of being a foreign correspondent, of being in Africa and seeing how mercenaries worked, of being in France and seeing how unprotected General de Gaulle was, and being bored around him and thinking, so if I was going to assassinate him, how would I go about doing it? So these are the kind of years of unavoidable persistence and thinking and, letting your novel idea brew or whatever it has to, transformative process has to go through before you get it out. So you've got to read a lot and you've got to persist.
Well, look, thanks for being a great guest on Always Take Notes. Wishing you all the best with Strong Words going forward. And I hope you maybe get a day off at some stage.
Thank you so much. Me too. It's been a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hello, it's us again. What did you make of our interview with Ed, Simon?
It was really interesting. I mean, this is showing my age, but I can remember FHM from the high period being sort of thrown around on the back of coaches on the way to rugby matches when I was a teenager. Although I don't think I ever bought it. So definitely it played a part in my sort of childhood. I thought very interesting, and I thought his kind of personal journey from Lads Mag mogul to single-handedly producing this really fun publication, pretty extraordinary actually. What about you, Rachel?
Yeah, I mean, Strong Words is a huge endeavour. I don't know. I mean, he has no time off basically, which is remarkable.
Literally none at all.
Literally none at all. It did make me laugh a little bit when he said he was going to launch a podcast, and our faces were a bit like, oh. We look forward to listening. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting. FHM obviously not my kind of reading material, but hugely successful. And yeah, I'm glad we got him on the show.
Where have we walked the line successfully, do you think, between chatty and cringy in this outro?
So far, I would say yes. Then also, some lovely people on Twitter said that they liked our outros, so
That one lovely person at least. Anyway, look, what have you been?
I was trying to hype it up. What have I been up to? The mad sort of end of year rush. So yes, editing things, writing. I wrote a roundup of the best TV shows of 2020. How about you?
I have also had a really busy week just trying to get stuff done. I have done the next version of this opus for Runner's World, which is sort of off my plate. I thought I was going to have to go to Cornwall to write about vaccine distribution, but then it all got delayed, so that's not happening. So really, yeah, just trying to get stuff sorted. I'm trying to get a visa for the Congo for a story at the moment, which is a bit of an undertaking. But yeah, kind of wrapping up for the end of the year. Anyway, this has been Always Take Notes, hosted by me, Simon Acombe.
And me, Rachel Lloyd.
Our producer and social media editor is Artemis Irvine. Our graphic design is by James Edgar. Our score is by Jess Danheiser.
If you'd like to follow us on social media, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Always Take Notes, on Twitter at Take Notes Always, on Patreon at Always Take Notes, and if you'd like to leave a review on iTunes or get in touch with us, please do.
Great. Many thanks. Goodbye.